Welcome to episode 745 of Salsido Paranormal. I'm your host, James Salsido, here again with Jen, the Arcane Observer, co-host of the show. And tonight we'll be talking about haunted objects, energy and or spiritual attachments to various objects that range from small to large and probably everywhere in between. So um, thank you all for being here. And if you'd like to support the show, and find all the social media and all the episodes of the show. You can find all that over at the new website, which is salsidoparanormal.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.com. And again, support is never expected, but always appreciated, especially these days. And if you sign up for the Patreon, you will get extra episodes once a month. So I just recently shared a couple of those, the most recent two of those, as previews for you all to hear what you will get when you sign up for any paid membership tier of that platform. So anyway, with that, let's get the show started here. Thank you all for being here and listening in. And Jen, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. It's probably going to be very interesting. I mean, we've both had a lot of experiences with, hauntings, at least to some extent, and the idea of haunted objects, I mean, I feel very comfortable and familiar with it, and I think a lot of people listening have had experiences that they couldn't explain with certain objects or, I guess I'm not sure if locations fall into this, but I think particularly we're just focusing on, you know, uh, personal effects and things like that, or maybe statues, but anyway, it's a big topic and there's a lot to talk about, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I noticed that in some of the articles I found, and it makes sense that we could talk about houses and buildings because in a way they are objects, and compared to the planet that we're living on, they can be small objects. But I do think that it would be good to focus more on more general objects that can move around in a lot of cases, and we'll cover all different things today. But yeah, it was I never thought about it until sort of looking into this, that houses could be haunted objects in a way. It's just that we don't think of them as objects so much. We think of them as homes, or whether they're our homes or others' homes, or important places in history. And so yeah, I thought that was kind of funny that really words can be very vague when it comes to these things. But yeah, I really wonder about how all the different kinds of objects there are that could have energy attached to them, because of course we've all probably heard about a lot about haunted dolls over the years. I mean, that's a really popular thing um, in pop culture and everything. With I was thinking about tonight. I think we need to do a show at some point on the Warrens and their role in throughout the paranormal history, the history of the paranormal in the U.S. and everything, and just try to do a deep dive into them because I think there's a lot there. But the couple that they encountered, of course, were at least one anyway was a show we did a while ago on Annabelle the doll. But it's not
Right.
just dolls; it's heirlooms, it's rings, it's all kinds of things.
Yeah, I would like to talk about them. It's it's become kind of controversial now, and I don't I kind of hate that, like because the Warrens
Yeah,
I thought were just incredible, and I don't know, because they took up some fame, they got fame a little, quite a bit of it. It's become pretty controversial, but I think we definitely should do a show talking about the Warrens and all their cases. That'd be really cool. But as far as like the haunted objects and things like that, I mean, haunted dolls, I don't know what it is, but the first thing about them that I think of is um that dolls initially were used in a lot of religion rituals, a lot of cult practices, way before they were taken up as toys, as children toys. And there are lots of collectors of these items, of dolls in particular. And I mean, I had a doll one time that I swear was completely was haunted. And I was like so sure of it. that I mean, there's a whole story to it, but so I'm not gonna go into it, but I've had a haunted doll, I had a haunted bed, like, I had what I believed was a haunted wardrobe. I've had, like, particular objects, like a doorknob at one point. Just whenever you bring something into the house and it kind of things start to change in the environment. And then I've heard a lot of other people too talk about taking things, in particular when they take things from locations, that they begin to have these types of experiences sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, just antiques in general. There are so many. I'm sure you found them, and I know I've found them over the years. People that write into websites about their experiences, and they'll say, "I found this amazing piece of furniture or this amazing picture frame or whatever it may be at an antique store," and I brought it home, and then of course all kinds of weird stuff started happening. So it's a if you're into any of this at all, it's a fairly common thing, and sometimes people are able to sense that there's a weird energy to these objects before they take them home, and so they're able to avoid those problems. But that's not always the case either, like I said. So yeah, they're all these kind of objects seem to be all over the place, and that's I had a I still don't know. I'm guessing it was a dream, but I had an experience when I was a kid. I used to be really big into all the Marvel and X-Men action figures, dolls basically. As a kid, and I had a bunch of them at one point. Probably would be worth a lot of money now if I had kept them in their boxes, but they're toys. And I had this dream one night. And I'm hoping it was a dream because otherwise it's pretty weird. Where they all started, and this was years before, like I believe that this was years before anything like Toy Story, like anything like that. But I had this dream where they all got up and they all started to move on their own and got up and started like climbing onto my bed and coming toward me like they wanted to attack me. And I had one that had like a toy laser blaster gun kind of thing, and it didn't light up in real life, but in that dream or that experience, it did light up. Like the place where the barrel was actually lit up. So, uh, and I kind of passed out from there, or blanked out, or whatever. But I still don't know what that was, and I don't know why I had that. Why I had that dream at the time of whatever it was going on there.
It's so weird. Yeah, I had a so I was it was like the last doll I ever got. I was 10 years old, and I had begged for this doll, for Christmas, really wanted it. And I got this doll. I did get the doll at Christmas, and I was, like, really excited, and I opened it up, and immediately when I looked at it, I was like, this WTF type feeling. It was the weirdest thing. And so I acted, like, really happy to get it, but I was just like, "This feels so weird." It's just like this it just had this complete weird aura right off the bat. And then it was, like, this doll that was kind of a collector item, and, that later on, after Christmas was all done and we'd done all the stuff and everything, I took the doll out and tried to play with it, like, I set it in the floor, and I got all of its stuff out. And it was just really we were just sitting there in my room, like, me and this doll, and I was just looking at it, and I was 10, and I just remember being like, Something not right with you, with this doll." It was the most bizarre thing, but I tried to pretend like I didn't I just kinda went on with it, and then I went to bed, and I had, like, the doll there in the bed with me, and I was sleeping, trying to, and I couldn't get over this feeling there was, like, a person. That it was like a person that was there. And so I eventually even, like, threw it to the end of my bed, you know? And then I felt like it was like this energy or, like, movement. And I literally got out of bed, like, went in the living room, and I told my parents, I was like, "I don't like that doll." It's something weird with that doll, and my mom took it, and she put it in a trash bag, tied it up, and put it up in her closet. And then when I was, like, 22 years old, she came to visit me, and she was bringing me all some stuff from the house. And she brings out this bag, and she's like, And then there's this, and I knew immediately what it was. It was like 20 it was like, like 11 years, 12 years later or whatever. And I open it and it's that damn doll. I was like, "Oh my gosh." Eventually, that doll wound up like I left it in a house up in the attic of this old house. Literally. It was just the strangest thing. I can't explain what it was. Sometimes I would see like it would be sitting somewhere where I hadn't put it. When I had it later, when I got it back that next time, I tried to kind of just display it in my room. But sure enough, I would feel like there was something looking at me from it. Oftentimes, at one point, I found it like it was like sitting facing the window, like it was looking out the window on the shelf where I hadn't put it that way. It was just the
Uh-huh.
strangest thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That is weird. So I have a story from a friend that I haven't talked to in years now, but he he's around the around my age, I think around the same age as me. But at one point he had a girlfriend, and her house, the girlfriend's mom had just a cat, like a whole display set up with all these dolls sitting on shelves, and with their legs hanging off. Which I have uh, another relative, a step relative, that had that. But and my friend went over to visit, his girlfriend, and they were there in the house alone at the time, and they heard this sound coming from those shelves, and they looked, and the legs of all of the dolls were moving forward and backward at the same time, making this soft thumping sound. And they got out of there because it was just too weird. And I mean, it's yes, a skeptic may be able to say that there was some kind of system there set up to make them do that mechanically, but then you have to wonder, why? Like, was the mom like messing with people in their house, or it just doesn't. I don't know. And
Well, yeah, it sounds weird.
yeah, yeah, and I have it would have been my step grandmother at the time. She had a whole setup like that with dolls on shelves and everything, and I never got a bad feeling from all of them, but I got a feeling of energy from all of them. Just all those figures sitting there or standing there. I forget if they were sitting or standing. This was last time I saw them was a good 10, 15 years ago or more now. Maybe
Yeah.
even earlier than that. But I always got a weird feeling in that room. And it was the living room. It was like the small living room. And one wall was just all this whole shelving unit. And so yeah, that's a whole thing, and it really is something to it. And I remember I think we might have done a show on that too. That the at some point before, because we've done some shows before this about how dolls were not originally meant, as like you said, as to be toys, and they were meant to be vessels for things, for spirits
Right.
and things like that. And um, so yeah, that's a whole topic right there. But it's not just dolls that
No.
seem to get energy attached to them. And so I know I've shared this story once before. Um, I've heard that pictures, like photographs, can have energy attached to them. And I'll never
Oh,
forget
yeah.
this one time when I was a kid. A bunch of my cousins and I were at my grandparents' house. Um, Same place where I've gone to out of body in my dreams a few times after they had passed, years later. Um, and we were exploring one of the two upstairs rooms, which we probably shouldn't have been, but we were, and no one told us not to. And we found this desk, and it had some drawers in it, and we found this picture in one of the drawers, and it was people that looked like they were from the family, but we didn't know any of them. And there was an old man in the middle of the picture, and he was looking off to the side a little ways. And as we watched or looking at this picture, we saw the man turn his head in the picture and look at us, and and his eyes were red, which of course that's possible in pictures, but usually you don't have people turning their heads in pictures. And we dropped that thing so fast and got out of there. We went back downstairs and never went up there again. And I still don't know what was going on with that picture because, something was manipulating or entering our minds and making us see that, I'm guessing, because, you know, something was going on there. And I still don't know what that was.
No, I have seen that with, like, posters and things like that, where it appears that way, but typically it was, like, when it was nighttime, and it just had this weird like, there's a presence there behind taking up behind the images that are present in there. And then there was one instance of seeing figurines and things like that. I had an aunt, and she was Catholic, and she had these statues and of saints and angels and things like that. And there would be these certain ones of them that'd be turned away facing the wall. And, everybody'd come in and, like, it'd be pointed out, like, "Oh, that's really weird," and she would mention it, and it would happen kind of on the regular, and it happened fairly often on the regular. And what's really odd about that is I've heard about that from other people, that they have had, statues turned around the other way. And so I think that's really odd. And, I don't know, that I never had any personal statues of mine that were turned around, but, Hirsch mentioned in the chat about clowns. For some reason, I don't know why, but a family member of mine on my birthday, starting from the age of, like, 7 until I was, like, 12, on my birthday would get me, like, this clown, different clown figurine, like a
Mm,
ceramic Hallmark type of clown figurine, and I kept most of them best I could for quite a while, and I moved, and I'd move, and they get broken, and I'd try to glue them back, and then anyway, wound up, I just ended up with just this one, and well, I had 2, but this one in particular that is involved in this story, and it was standing on, like, a little pedestal, and you'd turn it, and it'd play this song, and it was like a music box, basically, like a musical figurine, whatever you call. But
right.
whenever I was messing around with the Ouija board stuff that I've talked with you about before, on one instance, after that, I walked through, and at this, I didn't touch it at all. I wouldn't wind it up or anything like that. And I didn't like them. I just kept them because I've been given them, you know.
Right.
Anyway, this up on top of like a china cabinet, and out of nowhere, I walked through it was like a dining room, half living room situation, and I walked by it, and it just started playing its song and turning in circle, like, it was designed to do, because 'cause you'd wind it up and it would turn in a circle and play the music, and it just started doing that, and
Wow.
it gave me, like, such a it freaked me out so bad. I just stood there looking at it, waiting for it to stop, and it just kept on going like it had been wound up, which was just absolutely impossible. I considered that a type of poltergeist, actually. That's what I actually, because it was impossible how it was, you know? So I hadn't wound it or
Yeah.
messed with it in, like, a year and a half from that house, as far as just putting it there, and prior to that, had not wound it up. I didn't like it. I was actually
Right.
I didn't, so I just kinda would move it around and put it in different houses and things like that. Eventually, that got broke too, and so I have none of those anymore, but it's just really odd, you know? There was just no
Y-
way it was moving on its own.
Yeah. I've found over the years a few stories from people who had music boxes that would be wound up by someone or something that they couldn't see, that they just started playing on their own. And so that's a whole other thing. I don't think that's as well known as being a thing, but I've found a few accounts of that. I've shared a few in my shows over the years, and so yeah, that's really wild. So you're not alone there.
Yeah, we talked about that and clocks. You had a
Yeah,
story, I think it was we were talking about, clocks. We hadn't talked about the music boxes or anything like that, but I think it's kind of the same thing, these kind of working of cogs and wheels, and somehow may maybe they're easy to manipulate in a way. But the topic is it has so much to it, and I mean, there are still more things I can think of already just about personal objects. Like, I had a bed that I got. It was an antique bed that we'd found at, like, an auction house, and I was 15, and it was so cool, Actually, I've had 2 different beds. Anyway, that particular bed, it was because I like these old antique-y things, and I remember the first time laying in that bed and just laying in it and could totally feel just the energy of it as I laid there. Now, it could've just been that I was spooked out about it or something, but it was the most bizarre thing, and it took, like, months to get accustomed to it, to kind of blend into it, to be okay with it, and then I had this wardrobe, and it was like a from the 1800s or something. It was this old wooden wardrobe, and I kept that for a long time and would lug that heavy wardrobe from house to house, and it stood up. It was like a closet. It was like a standing closet with a mirror inside and a lock and key on it. But the very first night I got that, I, like, closed it and locked it, and I was laying in that bed anyway, and that door came open. It just
Mm,
came open. Even though it was a lock, now it could have just been that I didn't close it properly or something like that, but I knew, that it was just didn't make any sense. I had, like, locked it closed and tried to pull it open, and it didn't open, it was locked, and yet it opened up. Now, I never did that again. I never had that
right.
happen again, but it did that very first time I had it, and from that point on, it just took some getting used to it, and it had a mirror in it that was, like, original to the wardrobe, and it was all spotted and aged and, like, wavy. 'Cause it was all really old antique, but that really stands out. And then I got this other bed years later, another bed that was really neat, kind of Victorian era, very tall headboard, all wood, real neat. And I couldn't keep it more than a month. I couldn't sleep in it. It was just the most bizarre feeling of, like, I'd feel like a sort of like I was hyperventilating while I was trying to sleep. Like, I'd start breathing weird, and I
Uh,
couldn't get over it. I couldn't get comfortable in it. And I ended up selling it, but I even told the person I sold it to, though, that I've had trouble sleeping on it and so but they wanted it. It was really neat, but it was definitely, like, there was something weird about it, and I worried about it that, maybe somebody had passed away on that bed. It was at an auction house, and I don't know, I'm sure maybe even more than one person, but anyway, so that was really odd. The beds. I had 2 different beds and then that wardrobe. Now all of
yeah,
those things are gone now, that wardrobe is gone too, I left it in another house, but
so for a little while, I temporarily stored a couple of bookshelves for my dad when he was moving between places, and, one of those bookshelves, there was some energy attached to it, and I felt like every once in a while, there'd be someone right where the bookshelf was, just, like, watching, like, checking everything out in here, and then the feeling would pass, but it only ever came from the direction of that bookshelf, and once I got rid of it, or once my dad came and got it and used it, that feeling passed on. No more from nothing else like that happened from that thing. And I have an old, like china cabinet hutch kind of cabinet thing from my great grandparents, and that thing I get feelings of a presence from that once in a while too. I wonder if you know spirits that have had objects for long enough, if they use them as sort of portals or gateways or whatever, anchors to this world to come and check on things from time to time. Because I don't feel all the time from this cabinet. It's just once in a while I get the sense that there's someone there, and it's always from that one corner. It's actually right behind me, which is kind of funny as I'm sitting here talking. Um, but yeah, it's weird. Objects can, they can definitely have energy, and I think sometimes it's just energy that is residual that is there, but I also think sometimes it can be intelligent, um,
right.
whether it's spirits or other entities. I think that both can happen. Um, I my
Ricky said
sorry.
hold on, go ahead. No, go
Oh,
ahead.
I was gonna say I have a funny story from my dad and my stepmom. My dad paints houses and does buildings and things, and he was at the house where they were going to get rid of some books, and he found this cookbook that looked interesting, and it was older, and he brought it back to his house with him. And they started having an increase in weird sounds and bumps and footsteps and just stuff in general that increased or started again after they got this book. And eventually, my stepmom, who was fairly sensitive to these things, sort of noticed that they had this book in the house that she didn't remember that they had, and found out it was from this other house, and they got rid of it, and everything quieted down. So,
Wow.
um,
Yeah,
yeah,
books for sure.
yep,
Books fit
yeah,
into it. Ricky was saying in the chat, he was like, "Oh, Jen's gifting all possessed stuff to everyone." That but, what's weird about it is that this is really interesting. I've heard of cases where people they have, like, a haunted object or a haunting of sorts, and the item is kind of cursed. There's something up with it, and you have to give it to somebody, basically. Like, you can't sell it. You have to kind of leave it, and somebody else has to take possession of it. You can s I actually, no, I'm not so sure about that. I think you can sell, but you have to try to get somebody else to take it willingly from
yes, I've
you,
heard of
and then
that too.
they also take up the burden of it. So I just thought that was interesting he mentioned that. But, I mean, there's just a lot of these things that wind up it's really bizarre, but a lot of things that are donated to or they are bought up by auctions or they are donated to, thrift stores or things like that. That's where I get almost all of my stuff, and this would be unheard of in a lot of older cultures because they believed that and I've heard cases where people burnt everything or
Mm,
they would bury a lot of things with the individual, and the idea of wearing other people's clothes or taking other people's things, that there was this whole taking up on sort of these personal effects from people that they wore close to their body, that it was you were almost kind of taking on a bit of the essence of the individual who had it. And either it would coalesce or it wouldn't, but I've heard of wedding dresses, I've heard
yes,
of tons of things like that. And even though I still constantly go and pick up odds and ends from garage sales, from auctions, from thrift stores, it's pretty much the only where I go. I don't buy anything new for the most part, almost anything. And so it's really odd. Well, I mean, new stuff, that's practical that you need to buy new, but a lot of things that are any way decorative. And for example, like I picked up a bunch of these candle sconces that go on the walls recently. And I asked when I was checking out, I was like, all this stuff was in one place. I bought like 8 different candle sconces. They were like $1 a piece, like $1.50 or something like that from this near thrift store near my house. And I asked as I was leaving, I was like, all of this stuff was all in one place, just all of it's so beautiful, really neat. And I was like, somebody just donated all of it? And she was like, oh, well, someone passed away. And I was like, oh
mhm.
no. But yeah,
Oh,
here
no.
now I own it. Here now I own it.
Yeah, yeah, going also,
Yeah.
in the chat here,
Of old
also
of old age, so it
yeah,
wasn't like any kind of, it's sort of a
right.
natural thing, but
Yes, and I feel like I haven't heard too much about when it's a natural death like that. It doesn't seem like that it's as common. It doesn't not that it doesn't happen, but it's not as common for necessarily for there to be attachments always when it's natural death and in some cases. But now here's an interesting angle to all this is that Herschel says I had a piece of obsidian that I found. I am convinced it was bad luck. I got rid of it and things improved. So, and we were talking, I was talking with, in one of Michael Strange's shows a little while back, where the topic of crystals came up. And we talked about that before as well. So, and I've heard of them having positive effects like that, but I'm wondering what was going on there for it to have a negative effect like that. But I've heard of that as well with things that are found like that. That reminds me of I've heard stories about Hawaii. I think it's Hawaii, one of the islands there where there's volcanic stones that people take from the island and one of the islands there, and whenever they do that, they would start to have terrible luck. And there's actually like a mailing address that was created just because people are set up, just because people were sending back stones to the island to be put back where they found them, because people were
I
just
have
having such
heard about
terrible luck.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've heard about that. I heard about that, and I've heard about well, in one case, well, I don't do it anymore, but there was nowhere to walk in one neighborhood I lived in. I lived in a very urban area at one point for a while, and there was nothing nearby except that there was this really big, beautiful cemetery. So I'd go there really frequently and walk, just to walk, you know,
right.
and it was huge and park-like, and so I'd just walk around in it, but there was, one time, course, had went and with friends and everything, and this one guy, there was this, stick, this, like, really neat, long, like, strong stick. Anyway, for some reason, whatever whatsoever, he picks it and these we were kids. Anyway, so he picks up this stick and wants to and is gonna leave the cemetery with it. I was like, "You can't leave the cemetery with that stick." Like,
Yeah,
that's just you can't leave it with anything from the cemetery. You can't just and I've heard about people taking flowers. I've heard of people taking flowers from the graves and things like that.
oh,
It's like, you can't
wow.
do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like, you cannot do that. There's no telling what's gonna happen, but take up the burden yourself. I've heard of people taking a gravestone. I heard about this one
yes.
woman taking a gravestone from did you hear this story?
Not that one necessarily, but I've on some of the countless shows I've listened to, I've heard and things I've read, I've heard about people that have taken, when they're kids or whatever, they're not thinking about it, and
That's it.
they've taken gravestones, and then just all kinds of chaos happens. But go ahead with
Yeah,
yours. When you heard,
this woman took this gravestone, this young lady, of course, so she takes this gravestone, and I guess she started having these weird happenings around the house. She began to have, like, these dreams. She believed that she was being haunted by this ghost and that they were kind of in love. It started this whole love story. She was serious. She left her boyfriend. Her boyfriend was, like, being kind of attacked by this spirit, and she left her boyfriend for this spirit that was attached supposedly to this gravestone that she brought to her house. And it was, like, the craziest story I've ever heard out of the articles, and I mean, apparently true. I mean, true enough that she was telling the story, sometime later about her and her ghost lover that she met through this stone, like, from this gravestone she stole from the cemetery, which I think
wow,
there are definite laws against that in every form,
yeah,
but somehow they got
yeah.
away with it. Anyway, but that was the story, you know?
Also, Herschel threw that obsidian into Lake Michigan, so which of course there's a whole triangle there of all kinds of strangeness as well. So that's funny. But and then Ricky in the chat says those cemeteries in Louisiana are above ground, are wild looking. Yeah, because of the water, the water level, the water table level. They can't bury people that deep in the ground there. And then
Oh,
Ricky also says, my brother took grass from a church to heal our cat, and the cat actually got better. It lived for 6 more years. I'm sorry, not years. 6 months longer after she ate the grass from the church. That's amazing.
wow. That is. And there are lots of different accounts of, spell work and things like that that are done with cemetery dirt, but it would be churchyard dirt. A lot of these cemeteries were built around churches at one point. So
Right.
you have a lot of that I've heard about. I have one story. I had a roommate at one point, and he was from Italy. And this was a house, like a big house. So this wasn't like a friend. This was like a leasing out rooms sort of thing. It was like a big house that all these people were living in. Not a lot of people, like 4 people. And it was enough room that you kind of had your own space and this sort of thing. And they worked like a night shift, 12-hour shift at craft. And so we never saw him. Like we were like younger, the other people living in the house, and he was like in his 40s at the time. And which at the time, this was some time ago now. But anyway, we were telling these ghost stories, and he never really talked very much, but he was from Italy, and he had lived in New York City, and he had moved to the city that I was living in. And this is like I say, these rooms would be leased out, and they had like a little sit area and that sort of thing. And he tells this story from Italy that he heard from his mother when he was a child. And the story goes that there was a local woman who had passed away, and they took her body to the cemetery, and they had there kind of the mortuary area was in the cemetery in Italy. And she
Right.
was laid out there, and apparently at some point she woke up, wasn't dead, got up, and like was wandering the cemetery, and they found her the next morning out at the gates or near the fence, but basically at the fence, either the gate or just on the fence. I can't remember if it was the gate or the fence, holding onto the bars, and her head was like back, and she had died of a heart attack.
Oh,
And
wow.
so apparently, yeah, just a bizarre story, true story, according to him, that had happened there in their village, where she wasn't dead, but she woke up, and you can just imagine waking up
Yeah.
on a table in a cemetery, and then she just frightened herself to death, if she wasn't already in a bad state, but she wasn't completely dead. And just kind of not about haunted objects, I guess, but cemeteries, just kind of the odd thing about that.
Yeah, we should probably do a show on cemeteries and graveyards and burial sites at some point. Because yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
yeah, we should.
good topic as well. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so might as well here. I'll just mention some of the objects here that this article mentions, and I found this. So we've talked about a couple. We've talked about the dolls. We've talked about jewelry a little bit. Of course, jewelry. A lot of that has to do with things taken out of the earth, out of the ground, and formed in certain ways, but still, it's made of natural materials. And then there's people that I've never really been into it, but I mean, I know that rings can really be important symbols for a lot of things. And so it wouldn't surprise me if there's some energy that can be attached to that. We also haunted clocks. We covered that a little bit. Um, and now here's another one too. There's it mentions strange artifacts, and this is it mentions paintings, mentions just so statues, ancient statues, and this is where some of these I think some of these legends can come from, mythology can come from in some cases where there's something happened at some point, and more and more sort of focus was placed on an object, and I think that's another factor as well. The more famous something becomes, I mean, think of like we talked about Annabelle and Robert the Doll, and whether they were originally they had any activity around them or not, they both ended up in museums, and both of them, once they were in museums, there was reports of activity around them after they got there. So we talked about Ouija boards. There's so let's see. I'm just looking at this article here. Let's see, statues. I already mentioned that. Paintings as well. I've heard a lot of stories about that too. Paintings having spirits attached to them, and where there's just something about the creation of the painting or the subject or the original, the person that made it, the person that painted it, putting some
Oh, no
energy into it
doubt.
as well.
No. Well, I mean, you
So,
have the person, either the artist themselves who painted it, or you have that it sat in the house, almost like imagine people coming by and looking at that painting over and over again and seeing it, maybe growing up their whole life, or who knows. Same with mirrors. I have my grandmother's mirror, actually, from her house. And I remember growing up all my life seeing that mirror there in her dining room, and I have it now in my house too. And the sort of the way I kind of think of it, one time when I was working with the Ouija board. One second, I gotta check on something real quick.
sure, no problem. Yeah, mirrors are a whole thing too. Maybe I think we've done a show on that. I know I did a show about that with Mike. With Mike a while ago. I think that was like maybe the first show I did with him. Which was like 5 years
Right.
ago now. Just really wild. Thing it's been that long over on Troubled Minds. But go ahead.
Right. So, um, the gist of it was that when I was working with that Ouija board, I was talking with, with it and was asking where it was. And I was like, it said it was in the TV. And I was like, in the TV? That is so weird. Like, what are you doing in the TV? And it said that because everyone's always looking at it.
Mm,
So it was almost as if like the entity was in the TV because that's where it felt like it was being engaged with in some way or something. Really bizarre. And it was just the creep. I remember looking through the window because I did this on my porch. I wouldn't do it in the house. I'd only done it in the house the first couple of times. And the very first time that I had the experience with the Ouija board in the house, it was sort of this coaxing sort of thing that was going on. Because there was a conversation going on, and I was like, well, if you can do something, well, why don't you show us because it was it was like the entity was like, sort of boasting in a way.
hmm.
And no sooner had I said that the lights went out. And I didn't have an overhead light, I just had the lamp. And I went over and looked, and it was a plug-in lamp, like a lamp on a table, and the cable had been pulled completely out of the wall and was laying in the middle of the floor. Like it had been yanked out of the outlet with such
Right.
force that it flung the cord out into the floor, and the light had went off because of that. And so
Yeah.
after that, and then my figurine thing, and then like a bowl flew off of a counter, and I was like, and then there was lots of other things that started to happen. And so from that point forward, I was like, well, this can only be done on the porch. Like I don't know what difference
Yeah.
that would make, but didn't want to do it in the house, but I didn't want to stop doing it either. But when it said that, I remember looking from, the porch to the window, through the window to the TV and looking at it and just thinking, unbelievable, if that is true, if that is true about it. And that house I had gotten, it was the first house, I bought that house. I'd got it on a first home buyer's loan. And anyway, it was like there was something weird about the house anyway, you know.
Yeah. This makes me think of something I forgot to mention earlier. First, real quick, Matt Sowell in the chat says graveyard dirt is for binding and hexing, but can be used to heal and connect to the ancestors. So that's amazing to know that. But
Yep.
also with objects. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely recommend anyone who hasn't had a chance to listen to Matt Sowell's podcast. I'm terribly behind, but Temple of the Owl, check that out because he has a lot of amazing information there. And that's on Trouble Minds Radio Network, KUAP Digital Broadcasting. But yeah, with objects, and you mentioned we were talking about how some objects you have to sell or give to people. They have to take them willingly, and if they don't, I was thinking of so many cases I've heard of people trying to get rid of objects and either burying them or throwing them out, or just trying to get rid of them and then having them come back to them, having them appear in or near their home. And so there can be forces that can seem to be able to manipulate these objects in all kinds of ways. And yeah, objects reappear. Yep, definitely.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine told me this story. And so he told me that when he was, a teenager, like 13, 14, they used to go over to this friend of theirs' house, and it was a Ouija board story. And they were playing around with the Ouija board. And it was like there was weird stuff that would happen, and they would start. And one particular night, they saw something like move across the ceiling. All of them were laying there on the floor, and it looked like phantoms or something moving across the ceiling after they had done this Ouija board session. And, he went home, but his friends said, they kept having these weird experiences, and this went on for like a couple of weeks. And then there came this story where the dad of the other boy kind of heard that they had been doing this with this Ouija board, and he took that Ouija board and he like threw it away, and it came back. And then, like, I guess that he burnt it or something like that, or buried it. I can't remember which one. Then, so the story goes, the dad got up in the middle of the night and he urinated on an outlet and he died. Like, he got electrocuted and died. And that's the story that I heard from this person that I was, talking with about a lot of these things with the Ouija boards and stuff, just weird occurrences. Now I don't know if that's possible, but it's just the most bizarre story. And he was found in the hallway. And like, I don't know
Right.
if he had, and they deduced that, but I don't know, if he just, I have no idea, but it's just the most bizarre thing.
Yeah, that is. That's makes me think too of just we've been talking about objects that kind of are not really meant to be part of a house necessarily, but there are plenty of. I mean, we've already talked about mirrors and things like that, but I feel like I've even heard of places that had activity for a long time, but then once they were renovated, doors were taken out or things like that, the activity stopped. And I wonder how often it's because something that was there was energy attached to it was removed from the home and either thrown away um or sold to another place. I wonder how often that leads to things happening in one place for a while until the object is removed, and then things starting up in a completely different place where no one knows right away what's going on until they figure out, if they do, that it's this object that they got from another location. Makes me wonder too now in a way about garbage dumps, about like how much energy, even if nothing really major happens, how much energy is in like garbage dumps, waste, like those kinds of
Oh my
areas where
gosh. Yeah.
if I think about that, I've heard of like cars, which are also in a way haunted objects,
Mhm.
having activity around them and in them and things. And I've heard of places that have cars, people like junkyards and all those kinds of things. People having experiences there every once in a while too.
Yeah.
So really makes me wonder about all those options as well.
Yeah, vehicles, I don't know, I don't trust them, I really don't. I think that it is kind of iffy. I mean, they take on so many
Yeah,
different, owners and everything else, and there's just so many weird stories with the highways and with cars and these perfect synchronistic timings with them, and yeah, the whole topic of that, you know.
yeah,
And, but kind of back to small objects, or like odd
yes,
things like that. That one of the houses, that house that I lived in that I was doing so much with the seances and the Ouija boards and things like that, I took I took the bare minimum of my own things out of that house, but because I had bought that house, I took and they had left furniture in that house and everything. But when I left that house, it was built in 1921. But anyway, I took a doorknob from the house and I took it to the next house I lived in. Anyway, and I don't know why I even was moved to take it. It was like this old antique doorknob, but I don't even know why I took it. But when I did take that, it did seem as if there was this continuing on sort of thing, you know,
mm, yeah,
like the energy of it kind of carrying on. And then, left that behind and didn't think that anymore. It was just, it's odd like that. But it's electronics as well. I've
yes,
heard about people having electronics that they get that they picked up from a pawn shop and things like that. And then that, computers or, whatever, what have you, and that they seem to, you know, do bizarre things. I had a lady I worked for at a boutique for a period of time when I was living in that city, and her husband passed away from smoking in the bed. It was a fire, and
Mm.
he died in it, from suffocation, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Anyway, she got a message on her computer. It was a repetitive message, and she told me this story, that it came across her computer from him, from his account, and I don't remember what it was it said, but it was the same thing, just, typed out. It was typed out in like like 3 or 4 sentences, but it's
Wow.
as if had communicated through her computer, in some way. I don't know if that really qualifies as haunted, as if I don't know that that would mean that I don't think so. I don't think that that would mean that the computer would be haunted. I think that it was just being a medium for it,
Right.
but there are instances of, devices, you know,
Well, even
acting
radios.
odd. Oh my gosh.
I mean,
So
so many of those.
I have my papa's radio.
Oh,
This
wow.
is so bizarre. Yeah. So when I was growing up, he would put this radio on at night, and it's this old, flat radio, very simple, plugs in, and he'd play baseball games on it. And we go to bed listening to like a baseball game. And when he passed away, I took that radio, and I've only ever don't usually ever use it for anything like that, but it still works.
Mhm.
But that actually is something that I have kept. I kept his suits, I kept his guitars, that radio, and, you know, the photo album and stuff like that. But I kept that radio, and that's one of the only things left that from my grandfather after moves all over the United States, and from house to house to house. But I still have his radio, you know.
Yeah.
I have just
Yeah.
reverence. I keep it. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I know I've heard and read accounts of people who got radios from either family or, again, through I mean, think of how many resale or pawn shops or whatever probably have radios, and they got this radio and it would just start playing, and there wouldn't be any kind of timer that they could find on it. Um, and, it would just be and it would always be, like, tuned to one station, even if it was a station that the people themselves weren't really into, the genre of music or whatever. So, yeah, that's definitely a common thing as well. Um, so also, I see in the chat there, Matt's house says we should do a show on renovating houses, and yeah, we could definitely do that. You'd be welcome on to do that sometime. Matt's all, unless you want to have me on your show, we can do that too. So we can work on that, arranging that sometime. But yeah, I mean, start changing a house. And I mean, if you think about just doors and walls and things like that, when you move things around and add a wall or take a wall out, that's changing the flow of energy and air through a place. And
Definitely.
so, and then you hear about people that do that and they find objects like furniture or just newspapers or even shoes or just they find things in houses that belong to previous owners.
I
And
lived Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
and just that activity can get stirred up because of that. So, yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Um, so I lived in an apartment building that was an old Victorian home that had been made into like little apartment studios, basically. And one of my neighbors had been, and the landlord, they had been renovating out that apartment. And they opened up one of the walls and they found shoes inside the wall. And, I don't know if it stirred anything up whatsoever or anything, but I just thought that was really bizarre that they found shoes in the wall. Now, on a different occasion, I did take up a house, and the occupant of it was this elderly man, and he had been robbed. Essentially, these neighbor people had come over to use his phone, and somewhere in the midst of it, they had hit him with they'd hit him with something, and he'd fallen, and he'd broke his hip or something like that, and they were trying to rob him. And he went to a nursing home and he passed away. And I ended up moving into that house. And when I moved into the house, there was like stacks of Popular Mechanic magazines, newspapers. There were like 4 vacuums. There was just all this stuff. And he was obviously like a chain smoker and he had a cat. The cat still lived at the house and its name was Jumper. That's what I learned from the neighbors. And he came in on the first morning, still had the same furniture, the table and chairs and everything. And I kept this table and chairs in there. And he'd come in and lay on the table and I tried to like shoo him off the table and he kind of growled at me and I was like, okay, well, we know where we all stand. And I just let him live there just how he wanted to and just took care of him like he was my own cat. But then, so I began tearing out all the wallpaper in the house. And I ripped up all the carpet. And I started the back door. I'd come home and the back door would be open, or I'd wake up and the back door would be open. This would happen pretty regularly. And even though I'd locked it, I'd closed it. It was just a little turn, like a little turn lock. Like you just turn the little dial on the doorknob type of
Yeah.
lock. Well, then I put a butter knife up there to hold the door closed at the very top till I could get a new lock for it or something. So I thought that somebody was coming in or something. Somebody still had a key or something like that. Or, I don't know. Somehow somebody was still getting in there or coming into the house. Well, anyway, I'd cleaned all of this out. Wiped down all of the inside of the cabinets, everything, put my dishes in there. And I came home after I'd finally got the kitchen kind of squared. And I put my dishes in there all nice and neat. And I came in there to get a plate, then made my dinner, and I got my plate. I went to reach up there and get my plate. And there was a tooth, a human molar in front of my plates. I kid you not.
Yeah.
I've
That
told
is
you that
wild.
story, but yeah. It was from, and I don't know if it was because of the renovations or what, but it was just so weird.
Yeah. So I did a little search for about shoes and shoes being hidden in houses and everything. Apparently, it was a way of protecting against evil spirits that was used a few centuries ago, a couple centuries ago. That was a belief that people had that in Europe and I guess other places that
Wow.
if you buried or not buried, but if you put the shoes that were yours in the walls of a place, it protected that place against evil spirits from invading, I guess, which is really
Crazy.
amazing. So,
Yeah, I was thinking
but
like
yeah,
he was a serial killer or something and was like putting shoes in the wall, but that makes a lot more sense. That it was like some type of, a fortifier, a superstition. That makes a lot more sense. It's much
yeah,
more preferable if that be the case.
yes, definitely. Well, because I've heard that before that people have found those in houses, and I didn't get to look up why, but yeah, I put an article in the chat there. Uh, but yeah, so and I mean that's someone leaving an object there for a good reason. It's not meant to be bad, and I wonder if that sort of has effects on them and when they pass that they maybe didn't even expect, or it's just their residual energy that's still attached or part of their consciousness that's attached, and it gets left there, and when things start changing in a place, you have these experiences that happen.
Oh, sure. Like that house with him. I took that tooth after I thought about it for a while, and I put it in a coffee can, and I took some Saints coins and I put them like a few, like one in the coffee can, and out to the perimeter corner of the house, like the yard, under this bush, and I buried it there. And then I buried the Saints coins at the other corners of the house. And then everything did kind of calm down. I only moved because when winter came, it was just so poorly insulated. It was just really freezing, and there was just no
Yeah,
way to warm it up. And, can you imagine if you were like tilling and you come across like a coffee can with a tooth in it and some Saints coins? How weird that would be. It makes me think that, not just that, but I mean, just the strangest things you find when you dig, you know, digging in there, like 2 different, like, I moved into one house, and I only lived there for probably a week, and this guy come knocking on the door, and he said, you know, like, "I have some things I wanna pick up that I had left here, I used to live here," and I was like, "Oh, yeah, sure," like, "Everything's cleared out, though, there's nothing in here anymore, it's like an empty house." "No, they're in the floor room." "Okay." And so I went and, like, looked, and there's, like, this floorboard that was obviously before that, but it was cut it up, and sure enough, there were, like, these candles and these crystals and rocks and stuff, and true story, and he had put stuff in the floorboard, but he had been, like, a roommate in this house
Wow.
and
Yeah.
had left these things in the floorboard, and I've told that story before on mics, and I know it sounds bizarre, but it's just people doing things like that, like you're saying with the shoes and everything. It doesn't surprise me at all, and I've seen just, you know, things like that. There was, this house down in Louisiana when I was a kid, it was like a parlor house. They called it a funeral home, but I think it couldn't there was no, like, morgue or anything in it, so I think it was like a parlor house, basically.
Right.
But in that property, there was a barn, and there was, like, I think I've told this story, but real quick. So it was full of all kinds of stuff. They needed to get all that stuff out of there. They found out it was infested with snakes. They brought these guys to come out and like drag all that stuff out and get rid of all the snakes. And in the very back of that barn, they found this door that was covered and boarded up that was behind all that stuff. And they opened it up. There's all this stuff from like Santeria, like voodoo and stuff in that
Mhm.
room.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they drug all that stuff out and then like, actually, no, didn't drag that stuff out, if I remember correctly, because I was little. I was just a child, you know. They just covered that back up and, like, nailed it shut. So they drug everything out, cleaned it out, but my, uh, he my stepdad used that barn for his bait shop, so he had minnows and stuff that he would make for bait, and he put all of his tanks up and everything, and they were like these horse tanks, you know, that have the aeration and all of that. But he would come in there, and then it was this big issue, I remember, that all those minnows would be dead, and that happened, like, over and over again, and he couldn't run his base shop because none of the minnows would live, and I don't know if it has something to do
Right.
with the fish or something to do with the barn or who knows, but it was just one part of a bigger weird situation, you know?
Yeah, and you're always welcome to share whatever you want to about your experiences over and over again here, because I do that all the time too. So that's no problem. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've heard and read plenty of accounts of people finding things in their homes, and sometimes it is stuff that, and of course, a lot of people automatically label it as it must be people, worshiping the devil or whatever. But and I imagine there's probably rare cases where there is some kind of rare group that does that or whatever. But I'm guessing, that's not the only kind of ceremony or ritual or practices that are out there. So I'm sure a lot gets mislabeled as or misthought of as that, whatever that word is. But just considered that even if it isn't, and because people don't know, and if they don't know, then they resort to popular culture, I think. And but yeah, I've heard of that happening. People having activity in their homes, and when they move in, and then they find things, and they either get them out, and things calm down, or in some cases, of course, they just end up moving. So, or both. I mean, I've heard of that as well.
Right.
So, yeah, a lot of variables there.
Yeah, it reminds me of, like, well, you've heard of the D-Book box. The D-Book
Yes.
box?
Yep.
Yeah, that was
Yeah. I
really
mean,
interesting.
with that whole thing, I've heard the story of how it again it's one of those objects that supposedly um was it was something where you had to buy it or you had to claim it, and then once you
Right.
did, just bad things started happening to everyone involved. And so yeah, those kinds of objects, I think they're out there. And like I said, it makes you wonder about how many are out there that people have hidden away from themselves intentionally.
Mhm.
They're stored just so that they don't cause any trouble in places. But then those people
Yes.
eventually they pass away, or they have to move or whatever, and they don't get to take them, and then new people find them, and things start happening again. I wonder if there's any objects that are from ancient times that have just been passed down because people have experiences with them, and they
They
just
need to be kind of protected from other people getting a hold of them. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I can see that, especially
Yeah.
with things that are made of stone, that aren't going to just disintegrate over time easily. These
Mhm.
statues. We're gonna do a statue show, so we'll be doing that soon.
Yes, because, Hermes, he talked about how they used to in one of his, poetics, he was talking about that they had ways of putting gods into statues. That there was
Mm,
ways of doing that, and these statues would talk, and they would give people would get prophecies, and, it was a type of oracle situation with these statues, that the statues would literally be kinda like the doll conversation we were having. Like,
right.
they would literally be the home of that entity. And that goes into the churches too, and into housing, things like that. Like, the idea of the houses standing for I think it's so bizarre that people move into these homes, that were obviously family homes, generationally. A lot of work
Yeah,
put into them. But even not with that, you have houses that are put up for lots of people to live in over and over and over again, like apartments or, just these houses they throw up real quick and people just move in and out of them, move in and out. And they'll do that for decades. And there's so many countless people who have come and gone from them. And there's no telling the amount, the level, you know, of involvement in that case. And then it reminds me too about these objects you're talking about, like Horcruxes, sort of everybody's heard about that. They probably heard about it from Harry Potter, but the concept is actually it's a true thing. The idea of a person dividing themselves up into multiple objects through a sort of process of, you know, uh, purifying, sort of, you keep the object a certain way, so on and so forth. But I've heard accounts of this, and the idea that a person, when they pass away, they go into those objects. And so they still sort of are attached to them, or they can be summoned through those objects. And those objects are given to particular individuals, and they keep those things. And it could be family members or things like that, jewelry, or even just oddball objects. But some objects are, you'd think, like some objects might be better at holding energy than others. And I think that could be the case, in the
yeah,
case of mirrors or certain jewelry or things like that. So
yeah.
I think
Things
that
that
there's something with
sorry,
it.
yeah,
Yeah. Go ahead.
things that are made of um materials that are good at holding different kinds of energy. Like you said, mirrors. I mean, that's the whole thing. Crystals, stones of all different kinds that we know have various degrees of conductivity to electricity, and uh, and then of course a lot of stones are used in making modern electronics in different ways. Um,
Right.
so that makes sense that there'd be some of that going on too. Um,
There's got to be
even
something to it about like why
yeah,
it's something is special, right?
and I think too. I mean, I would imagine that the more significance an object has to someone, even if it isn't necessarily made of conductive material necessarily, if it's important enough to them in their life, for especially if it has like multiple meanings or multiple levels of importance, and they really identify with it, if it's a ring or something like that, piece of jewelry, um, and they focus on it and they keep it safe. And I mean, I've heard a lot of accounts of people who have jewelry boxes and jewelry and things like that, and it gets moved around in their homes, or goes missing and reappears and all those kinds of things. So it makes sense that that could be easy way to attach to things, and
Yeah.
um, and then to have things happen afterward.
I think that, because otherwise we'd say that, like, well, everything is haunted.
Right.
Everything. That's not the case. It's got something to do with these particular items that either take on, like those beds. Could it have
Yeah.
been a deathbed? It could have been,
Right.
It's what it felt like. Like maybe that was the case. Or that the fact that the wardrobe with it was that mirror. Imagine somebody day after day keeping that. And maybe even keeping it was a very fine antique. I would imagine somebody kept it a lot of times family members would pass their furniture down. For example, my mother has the furniture that was brought over from my grandfather's family from Germany, and that's been
Oh,
divided
wow.
up amongst the sisters, all the different furniture pieces. So it's like those items get carried down generation after generation till eventually the family gives it up to an auction house, or it doesn't get carried on anymore, or something happens that it ends into a dead line and doesn't get for some reason. And then some rando comes and buys it, and it's been in that family for, like, 300 years, or something like that, 200, 300 years of people using it for the same purposes, you
Yeah.
know?
And
I think it's yeah,
all that energy, that similar energy from all those relatives that could then be attached to that object, and then it
yep,
could react to someone who doesn't have that same energy in unexpected ways.
yeah, yeah.
So
So it's not just everything. I think there must be something to it, otherwise everybody's stuff would be flying off the walls, it'd be all crazy. It's
right.
these unique items that there's something about psychometry, I think. Yeah, like the idea of,
Yeah.
like, is that what it is? When you touch something and you kind of feel is that what it's called? I can't remember, but there's some type of, telling where you put your hand on something or you look at something and you can kind of tell what it is,
Yep. And
and
that is it.
maybe some individuals feel that, and they are drawn to those things, and they so they end up with them. But then they also, have these experiences, so I don't know, or maybe there's something like that, though, that draws kind of my aunt would say it's like calling your name, and she would use that,
Right.
like, for anything, like, "Oh, I bought these new shoes." It was calling my name,
Yeah.
so there's no background to it, but something like that, you know?
Yeah. Going back to beds, I don't know how many people used to watch all the also, let me see here. Yeah, Matt Sala says, "I use psychometry to tell when my avocado is ripe." There you go. That's useful. But, I don't know how many people remember the original Unsolved Mysteries TV show. If you've seen reruns of it or whatever, or seen it online. There was an episode that, where it was about a place that had activity in it, like paranormal activity in it, and it all started after the family bought this bunk bed for their 2 sons, and, of course, just all
Oh,
kinds of
no.
crazy activity, and, they eventually they figured it out, they traced it to when this happened, and they got rid of it, and I don't remember what it was, but they found some kinda weird symbol that was, like, carved into the frame of the bed,
Okay. So bunk
and
bed. Go ahead.
yeah, and there's a lot of stories about people having weird, like, experiences surrounding bunk beds, so but, sounds like I triggered something in you again.
Yeah. So well, just a thought on it. People don't know it. Well, they do know it, right? But so I've heard terrible accidents with bunk beds,
Mm,
like
yeah,
where because that fall is pretty significant. And if you just I don't know. If you understand if you follow. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like if a child were to
yeah,
fall
that
off that
fear,
bunk, yeah, that's quite a drop, you know.
yeah. Yep, I've been very lucky. I've never had to sleep in the top bunk of a bunk bed, but even the few times, because I went to summer camp when I was a kid, and they all had all these cabins always had bunk beds most of the time, and I never liked the fact that there was this bed above me, even if it was empty, because usually it was. I tried to make sure I always got like an empty bunk bed when I went to those camps. And, I never liked the fact that there was this giant metal thing above my head, above me, that if it, like, came apart, it would just fall on me. Like, I never liked that. And then, of course, I
Bunk
mean
beds are so cool. They are,
yeah,
like when you're a kid. But yeah, there are those tragic accounts, of where it goes wrong. Like they're asleep and they dead fall off that if there's no bars. I've heard about that at camps and things like that. there's no barrier, which is just foolishness. But I've heard accounts of that where the child
Yeah.
rolls off the bed.
Yeah.
You get
Yeah.
you follow. Yeah. It's
Yep.
terrible, really. But I wonder
Yeah, it is.
if it's more than just that symbol. It could have been that too, or all, I don't know. Or the child could have carved something into it as well. Just a passing idea and just carving on. I don't know. There's no
Yeah,
telling, but it's
I think
terrible.
in the TV series, the idea was it was something that was like carved in by someone that made it, someone in the factory or whatever that made the bed. So, but yeah, either way, um, that was like one of my first ever experiences watching a show about paranormal stuff. Was watching that show years ago. But yeah,
It
it's
makes
this.
me think of something. Like the where it came from being produced.
Hmm.
There was this news article that came out. It was from like a Dollar Tree or a dollar store of some kind. And there was this toy, and it was a flashing light toy, you turn it on. Inside of it, there was like this diagram of some kind. I'll have to find the article and post it. And I'm not gonna even talk about it too much, but just, in the production of a lot of a lot of things coming out of
Hmm.
factories, in countries far away, and these people, that are making them and everything, and just their energy and stuff going into them. But I remember getting a toy one time when I was a kid, and I opened it up. It was like from, just I don't know what store, but there was
Yeah.
this long black hair in the actual like stuff. Like in the actual packaging. There was this long black strand of hair. And I was like, no way. It was like inside the plastic, inside the thing. It came from production, but stuff is just so I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like that was so bizarre.
Yeah. That is weird. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah, objects I think can take on energy for a lot of reasons in a lot of different ways. And yeah, I think this has been a good talk on this topic here. There may be more, but I mean, I think we've covered quite a bit.
I think we've
So
covered all of it. I mean we could go on and on, but I mean I think I've covered all my stories I can think of and things I've heard about with it. And I think, yeah, objects, I think they can be haunted. By haunted,
yeah,
I think they could be, completely touched or have absorbed 100%, you know, the environment for various reasons. Yeah, I really think so. And I think we covered it.
yeah.
And
I have
been talking
one
about
more funny story about an object that I don't know if this qualifies as being a haunted object, but it was something that was a pretty funny thing that happened with it. My dining room table that I have is from my family as well, and at one point I started noticing every so often I would hear what sounded like someone knocking on it, like two or three times here and there, and I was like, "That's weird. That never happened before." And I kept on having that happen on and off. And one time, my mom and she had her her one of her friends came over to visit me one time, and they were the friend was looking at the table, and he said, "Wow, everything that table looks like it's really all the joints and everything, the legs and all that looks like it's really loose. You want me to fix that for you, tighten everything up for you so it doesn't fall apart?" And I said, "Oh yeah, that'd be amazing." And so they did that, and after that, I never heard that knocking on that table again. And I really wonder if it was my grandpa on my mom's side stopping by because it was used to be his table. And
wanting it
he was
fixed
probably, yeah, I
or
think it
some.
was trying to get my attention to show me, hey, this table. But of course, I'm legally blind. I didn't notice, and I mainly use my dining room table for just putting stuff on there. I kind of eat at my computer table most of the time, so I just didn't notice, and yeah, after that happened, and after it was fixed, I never heard that again. Although who knows? Maybe someday I will hear it again when it needs to be tightened up again. That wouldn't surprise me either. So yeah, there's one more story for everyone. But yeah, thank you as always, Jen, for being here, and this was great. And look forward to talking to you next time, with you next time about statues.
You too. I had fun. It let me vent a lot of like my stories. I enjoyed it. It's fun. And thank you for having me, James.
Well, thank you. No problem. Always glad to. And yeah, everyone. I'm just for anyone that's listening to this show right when it comes out. I'm going to start recording again on Mondays and Wednesdays. Just 2 shows. Just my solo shows. At 8 p.m. Eastern in my Discord server. And so that's going to be, hopefully that'll work out. And yeah, so that's basically the only update I have for show stuff. But everyone, thank you for being here and listening in. And we will talk to you next time on Salsido Paranormal. Take care.